Let's dive right into today's explainer, because we are unpacking a truly bizarre reality. It's this wild paradox where your financial success is actually determined way more by your behavior than your brain power. We're digging deep into Morgan Housel's profound insights on the psychology of money. Now, usually, we just assume that highly complex fields require, extreme technical intelligence to master. Like, you absolutely wouldn't want an amateur performing your heart transplant or designing a 50-story skyscraper, right? But finance? Well, finance is just completely different.
We're going to kick things off with a seemingly unexplainable story to uncover the hidden psychological levers of money. Seriously, ask yourself, in what industry on earth can someone with zero college degree, no formal training, and zero professional connections massively outperform someone with the absolute best education and highest pedigree? It totally sounds like a trick question, but it's an actual historical fact that perfectly sets up everything we're about to explore.
Picture this incredible contrast for a second. On one side, we've got Ronald Read. He was a rural gas station attendant who fixed cars for 25 years, and then he swept floors as a JCPenney janitor for another 17 years. He lived in a totally modest house, and his main hobby was literally just chopping firewood. Now contrast him with Richard Fuscone, a top-tier, highly educated finance genius. We are talking about a Harvard-educated Merrill Lynch executive with an MBA. A guy who was so successful he retired in his 40s to become a philanthropist, living in an 18,000-square-foot mansion with 2 elevators and 7 garages.
Now, here is where it gets absolutely wild. When Ronald Read, the humble janitor, passed away in 2014 at 92, he literally made international headlines. Why? Because he left behind an $8 million fortune. No way, right? But there was no lottery win, no secret inheritance. He just saved whatever he could, invested in basic blue-chip stocks, and waited patiently for decades. Meanwhile, around that exact same time, Richard Fuscone, the Harvard executive, he went completely bankrupt after the 2008 financial crisis. His massive estate was actually sold off in a foreclosure auction.
And this perfectly captures the core premise of what we're looking at today. Doing well with money, it isn't a hard science like physics or engineering, it's a soft skill. Ronald Read was patient. Richard Fuscone got greedy. That is literally all it took to completely eclipse the massive gap in education and experience between those two men. You see, finance is overwhelmingly taught as a math-based field. You put data into a formula, you get a result. But knowing what to do mathematically tells you absolutely nothing about what actually happens in your head when you try to execute it in real life.
So if we want to master this soft skill, we have to start with a fundamental truth about human psychology. Before we judge others or dole out financial advice, we have to realize that no one is actually crazy. Our financial worldviews are wildly distorted by our own tiny slivers of life experience. The source material points out something fascinating. Your personal experiences with money make up maybe 0.0000001% of what has actually happened in the world, but they make up 80% of how you think the world works.
To really drive this home, let's look at John F. Kennedy. When someone asked him about his memories of the Great Depression during the 1960 election, he flat out admitted that his family had one of the great fortunes of the world and they actually got wealthier during that time. He said, "I really did not learn about the Depression until I read about it at Harvard." Think about that. Even prominent figures like JFK were completely insulated from the defining economic terror of their generation. It just proves that no amount of reading or studying can genuinely recreate the emotional scars of actually living through financial devastation.
So the crucial takeaway here is that different generations are raised in entirely different economic realities. A person who grew up dead broke views risk in a totally different way than the child of a wealthy investment banker. Or someone who lived through the hyperinflation of the 1970s looks at money differently than someone who's only ever known the stable prices of recent decades. They aren't disagreeing because one is smarter than the other, they are just making decisions based on their totally unique lived experiences. What seems like a completely crazy financial move to you might actually be perfectly rational to them based on their mental model of the world.
Which brings us to a really dangerous ego trap. Bill Gates famously said that success is a lousy teacher, mostly because it seduces smart people into thinking they literally can't lose. Look, we all want to know how to get rich, right? So we tend to look at extreme outliers, Warren Buffett, the massive tech billionaires, and we try to copy them. But doing that completely ignores the massive, hidden roles of random luck and unexpected risk. When you focus solely on extreme examples, you are basically studying the least applicable situations for your own life. Instead, we should really be looking for broad, common patterns of success.
Let's look at one of those broad patterns right now. Patience. And let's talk about why it is so incredibly difficult for us. Our brains are naturally wired for simple, linear math. If I ask you to add 8 plus 8 plus 8 9 times, you can easily tell me it's 72. Easy. But wealth is built on exponential compounding. If I ask you to multiply 8 by itself 9 times, your head explodes. It's over 134 million. Because this exponential math is completely counterintuitive, waiting patiently for investments to compound feels deeply, deeply unnatural to us. And that's exactly why people constantly interrupt the magic of compounding by trying to find quicker, far riskier ways to get rich.
And you know, this impatience often leads right into another massive behavioral flaw. The truth is, wealth is actually what you don't see. Spending money just to show people how much money you have is absolutely the fastest way to have less money. There's this crazy story about a wildly successful tech executive who used to skip $1,000 gold coins into the Pacific Ocean just for fun. He even handed a hotel manager a literal brick of cash just to insult him. Unsurprisingly, that exact same executive eventually went totally broke.
This desperate desire to show off is captured perfectly in what's called the man in the car paradox. Think about the last time you saw someone driving a flashy Ferrari down the street. I guarantee you didn't look at the driver and think, wow, I really respect that guy. No, you probably just fantasized about being in the driver's seat yourself. We buy expensive things because we want respect and admiration. But the deep irony here is that other people don't actually admire you. They just use your expensive stuff as a benchmark for their own desire to be admired.
So, if we're constantly fighting our own instincts to show off, and we're struggling with the mind-bending math of compounding, how on earth do we make good choices? Well, because we are emotional creatures, aiming to be just mostly reasonable with our money is actually way more effective than trying to act like a cold, highly rational spreadsheet. Financial decisions aren't made in a vacuum or in a textbook. They're usually made at the kitchen table. If a certain financial strategy makes perfect mathematical sense, but it causes you to lose sleep at night or hurts your family life, it's just not a good strategy for you. Aiming for reasonable consistency over decades will absolutely always beat trying to execute a perfect robotic plan that you inevitably end up abandoning.
Our emotional wiring also perfectly explains why we are so easily seduced by financial pessimism. Think about it. Optimism often sounds like a naive, cheesy sales pitch, while pessimism sounds like profound, urgent advice from someone who's just trying to protect you. Even during times of unprecedented economic growth and rising life expectancies, humans are just remarkably drawn to narratives of doom and gloom.
The philosopher John Stuart Mill actually noticed this all the way back in the 1840s. He wrote that the man who despairs when others hope is admired as a sage. It's so true. Pessimism captivates us intellectually. It feels urgent, it feels protective, and it sounds smart. Tell someone that things are generally going to get better, and they'll probably ignore you. Tell them their savings are in danger of an imminent market collapse, and boom, you have their undivided attention. But historically speaking, optimism is actually the most realistic bet, because the world genuinely tends to get better for most people over time.
All right, so let's tie all of this together. We know we need to avoid comparing ourselves to extreme outliers. We need to let our money quietly compound, stop spending just to impress the neighbors, aim to be reasonable rather than perfectly rational, and resist that seductive trap of pessimism. But ultimately, we have to cut through all of these rules and ask ourselves one huge question. What is all this saving and investing actually meant to achieve in the first place?
Well, decades of psychological research have revealed a super fascinating truth about happiness. It isn't about being richer than your neighbors or having the absolute most prestigious job title. The single highest dividend that money can possibly pay you is having control over your time. It's the ability to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, for as long as you want. That level of freedom, that is absolutely priceless, and it is the ultimate metric of true wealth.
To actually achieve that kind of freedom, the author lays out a few essential, very actionable steps. First, you have to stop the moving goalpost. There is absolutely no reason to risk what you already have and need just to get what you don't have and don't need. Second, you must save money, not just for a specific purchase like a car or a house, but as a buffer for a wildly unpredictable world. You literally need to save just for surprises. And third, always prioritize control over your time above material possessions, because humility and empathy, they will bring you so much more respect than horsepower ever will. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final, pretty provocative thought to apply to your own life. Knowing that money is fundamentally just a psychological game, ask yourself right now, what does enough truly look like for you? Will you actually recognize it when you finally have enough? Or are you going to let that goalpost keep moving forever? The answer to that single question might just be the most important financial decision you ever make.
Thanks for learning with me today, and let's keep exploring.